Good evening, Patriots around the world, and I want to welcome you back to another episode of Fortnite Patriots. It's going to be a really busy week. There's been a lot of drops. I'm going to be getting back into that here shortly, but I've been working on this video as well as my other jobs, so I've been pretty busy the last couple of days. I wanted to take the time to do something a little bit different. A lot of times when I listen to news, when I listen to the different YouTube videos on Q and stuff like that, I like to keep my hands busy and do something that's a little bit relaxing. So one of the things that I do is I own a company called Celtic Creations US, and it's a leather company. And I'm going to show you guys today how to make a leather-bound Patriots Journal. Let's get to it. First thing you're going to need is a nice piece of leather. Flip the leather upside down. And you want to have this leather to be no less than 3-ounce leather. I wouldn't go above 6 ounce. That's 6 ounce right here. I want you to trace all the way around. And make sure this is on the back side of the leather because you will not be seeing this. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to get a tape measure or ruler. And we're going to measure 1/2 inch all the way around. So this square will actually be 1 inch larger all the way around than the book is itself. And the reason we're going to do this is because this is going to be a type of journal that you can remove an old journal and replace it when this one's done. If I was to actually bind a book, I would do it exact measurements. So you want to trace all the way around, make sure that the lines are straight, because this needs to be a perfect square. Now the next thing we're going to do, put the book back over the top of it and make sure that you do have that, because like I said, once you cut this leather, you can't go back. So go down, make sure that you cut on the outside line. Do not cut on the inside line. Go all the way around. This will take a little bit of time. You get yourself some really good scissors or a good knife. I prefer the scissors because I have more control. But this will take you a little bit of time. The thicker the leather, the harder it is to cut. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to get a bevel tool. I love this tool. This tool is probably one of the most relaxing things you can do with leather, in my opinion. So you flip the leather over to the nice side, and you're going to tilt it at an angle, and you're going to follow the lines all the way through. It'll guide itself, and then that excess leather pulls off. So now you're not going to have hard corners on the book. It's going to be just a gradual roundness, and it just makes it look all around better when you're finished with it. So go to each corner with something round, quarter medicine bottle, and you're just going to trim right around there. Make sure that you do these really carefully, and that way you don't have corners on your book. You have a nice round to it. It looks a lot better. I've had the round corners, and they bend a little bit easier if you don't do this. So now what you're going to do is you're going to measure dead center of the book. You're creating the binding. So in this case, I want this to be 1 inch long. So I make sure that the inch is centered by measuring from both directions. And I do this at the bottom, and I do it at the top. Then I'm going to take my ruler, and I'm going to match those lines up, and I'm going to take a pointillism tool, and I'm going to direct the line. That way it's not leaving an imprint, it's leaving just an imprint, not ink or anything like that. So now I want to create the the horizontal lines that go onto the back of the binding. So what I'm doing is I'm starting at the top and the bottom quarter, or I'm going to do a 1/2 inch, and then I'm going to do 1 inch down off of that, and then I'm going to do another 1.5 inches, and then I'm going to have my center. So you need to measure this out, make sure everything is accurate and everything is centered. So then you go through and you connect the lines, and this is what you're going to end up with. Now we're going to move on from here, and this is going to be our edge tool. This is a straight edge curve tool, and basically what you're going to do is go over those lines, and the little indentation that it makes will actually help guide this tool. So you want to go, and not too deep. Basically what it does is it makes an indentation and it spreads, so it doesn't cut in too deep. So on this board, you can either use tape or you can use laminate. I've used tape many times. It actually lasts a little bit longer. And you're going to need to go into your computer. I do this, I set all my stuff up ahead of time. I draw my stuff in AI, and then I move it over here. So what you want to do is you want to go through and make sure that everything is nice and tight and measured out. You've got to measure your book ahead of time on both sides. In this case, I wouldn't want to go wider than 5.5, or height, I wouldn't want to go over 7.5. So I'm getting that set up, so when I print it out, everything is the right size from the center of the book where I have my binding on around. Now when you're cutting this out, you want to leave a little room on the edges in a minute, and I'll show you why. It doesn't need to be much. And what you're going to do is you're going to get your laminate set up, or your tape. I've used both, they work just as well. And then you just want to make sure that you get all the rivets and stuff. It'll make your tracing easier. This is why I left that little bit on the end, so you don't have any of the sticky laminate stuff sticking out. It's nice and everything's smooth. So now what you're going to do is you're going to take the binding, and you're going to get just a little piece of tape. Now you want to tape these down because you're going to have to lift it, see where you've gone before, and you don't want it to move over at all, because then your trace is going to go off a little bit. So I put a little piece of tape down, and then what I'll do is I'll get a little bit of something that doesn't leave any kind of fibers. Paper towel is what I usually use, and I'll lay some water down in there. Not a lot, you don't want it to be soaked. So now what you're going to do is you're going to go around and you're going to trace around every little part of those designs. Make sure that you get every little tiny detail, because this right here is what's transferring it from your paper over to the leather. The reason that you wet it, because it makes the leather a little bit softer, and it'll take your pointer tool a little bit easier without you having to press too hard. Next thing you're going to do is you're going to go back to this cutting tool, and you're going to do the same exact thing that you did a moment ago. Go over every single aspect of it. With this tool, all it does is it puts a little bit of a cut indentation into every single line that you just traced. And this does take a little bit of time. There's a better way to use this tool. It's just not comfortable to me, so I don't use it the way that it's properly supposed to be used. And this is what you end up with. Now you're going to need a bunch of different tools for this job right here. I mean, you can get these for, I think, $15 at Hobby Lobby, basically what you need. So you're going to need, I'm using a star tool, I'm using a couple of flat bevels, and a couple of textured bevels. And I'll show you why I use which. And then you're going to need just a decent weight mallet. First thing I'm going to use is one of my larger textured tools, and I'm going to go around and I'm going to start doing the center, the binding, because I want to make sure that everything's nice and balanced out. So what I do is I put it in an angle and I just let it fall through the line. You want to make sure that you have enough moisture on that leather. This is where you really want to get it nice and wet. If you can see, there's some water on there, because when you hit this tool, it softens the leather, and when the leather dries, it hardens. Now I'm going to take a texture tool, and I'm going to go to every other one on this, and I'm going to start at the very, very end. So you want to texture all those in nice and well. It's really pretty, and it shows up nice when you do your dyeing. And you can either do it with the mallet, or you can do it by hand. You just kind of go up and down with it. And, you know, basically just make sure that the hard lines are out with, you know, and it's nice textured all the way through. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get a larger tool with a flat, or one of my larger flat bevels. And I'm going to go around the Thailand country. And then you use your smaller tool for some of the smaller areas, the smaller flat tool, because it gets into the fine lines when you're doing really, really tight areas. Now I think this entire project took me about 6 hours, and I've condensed it into 17 minutes, but I wanted you to kind of, rather than doing a time lapse, I went all the way through and then I just sped it up so that you guys can kind of see everything that goes into it. So I'm using my smaller tool here, and this gets me into the tighter areas, and it doesn't spread out as far. And then I'll surround it with a texture tool, because I want my texture to be on the outside. Now you can play with this. I've played with the tools. You can do them different ways, come from the lines in different directions, and it makes different things. Some people prefer doing one way, and I prefer doing another. Now I'm going to take my texture tool, and I'm going to texture inside the circle, but not on the elephant. And like I said, it's hard to see now, but when I actually go through, when I do my dyeing, it stands out, because certain things soak in and certain things don't when you play with the dyes a little bit. And don't be afraid to take your time with this. You don't want to, make sure that you want to stay in the lines, like a good coloring book. Make sure you stay in the lines. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my texture tool, and I'm going to flip it around so the actual bevel will be facing out away from the inside of the letter. And and I want it to have a little bit of texture because this is the foreground to an American flag. And I wanted to have the where we go one, we go all. And what I'm doing is I'm going back and forth between my bigger tool and my smaller tool. They're both textured, they have the same texture on them. One's just easier, I can hit the top of it with one hit, and the little one I can get into the tighter spaces without it pushing over what I've already done. When you get like to the top to the W's is a good example. And here's my dog Avalon. He's awesome, and she loves to hang out and watch. And she would be up here helping me if she could, I can guarantee it. So now I'm gonna get my bigger tool, my bigger texture, and I'm gonna go around the excerpt of the flag. I'm going to change my tool out, and I'm going to get a flat tool, the smaller one, because I don't want the texture now, because this is my background. And I'm just going to follow my lines and make sure that I don't overlap the W or any of the other letters. Now I'm going to take my star tool, and I'm going to be real careful. I'm going to go in and just pop my stars so that I can get them all inside there nice and tight, and little bits of them inside between the letters, because the star part falls within that area. I'm going to go around and do my Q. Now this one is my texture tool and I'm facing it outwards. And like I said, this stuff will show up more when you actually get to the dyeing process. Make sure, with this whole thing, I'm going to add a little bit to it. So what I'm doing is I'm bringing my pointer laser tool and I'm using my thumb as a measurement. And I'm dragging it all the way around. And I'm creating just a minor little border. Not all the way around in some cases. I want to create a sense of symmetry to it. You need to use this aspect for balance in the overall picture. So make sure that you get it nice and wet before you go through and you do your tooling. And to me, a border in the books looks really good. It always just kind of adds a little bit to the final product. And it's the little details that make a big difference. Sometimes I'll actually go and do other things and add different kinds of texture. Now I'm going to use my knot tool, and I'm only going to border it on one side of the book. Sometimes there is a such thing as overdoing it, so I try to keep it as simple as I possibly can. Now make sure you hit it really good from the tilted back, in the center, and forward, so you can get all of the indentation. Now I'm going to use my logo tool. This is my company name. And you want to make sure you hit this really hard and good in there. Do it 18 times if you need to. Sitting in one spot so it doesn't move around. Now what I want to do is go around the edges and just build that up a little bit, and this is what you get. Now the center part, I always generally put initials in the center. So I'll have, just to balance it out, I've got the Celtic triad, and I'm going to do 2 crosses because I am a Christian and I always like to spread that through. Now the initials that I'm putting on here are MP from my friend Mary. And I always like to have something that's personalized. So I generally will do initials for the most part, unless they want me to do a whole name or something like that. And then after my stamp, I always go back with my tools and go around them. So it gives it more definition. This is probably the most important part of the project. All right, first step, this is a dark highlight. And what I do is I just go around and I spread it deep so it falls into the cracks on the things that I want it to, but I'll just spread it, dab it here and there around the book. I want it covered splotchy because it gives a really good effect here in a second. Now this is the lightest that you go. Remember, you start light and you work up. You cannot, once you do something dark, you can't do light over it unless you completely cover it white and redo it. So this right here is you start light and then you work up. Now you can start to see kind of an antique effect with the black that I use. Now I'm going to go through with my blue, and I'm going to do the flag first. I'm going to go back to my oxblood, then I'm going to fill in my flag lines. Remember, start light and then go dark. Do my Qanon in red. And I'm moving over here, so I'm going to be doing the colors. Now, I made a mistake here, and this is, I did this on purpose. I wanted to show you how to fix a mistake. So you go back and you cover it up with white Covacolor. Now I'm going to go through and put my blue, See how that blue covered up that white? Now it just looks like part of the book. Now we're going to use light tan. You can go over everything with this. If it's lighter than the blue and the red, it'll just dull it down and antique it. It will not cover it up. Now what I'm doing is I'm taking a dark stain and I'm going around and I cover the entire book. And you just blotch it. Like I said, it doesn't really cover the letters up. Now this is a dye pen. You need to take the insides out and put it into the ink and it soaks it up. Make sure you wear gloves because this stuff will get everywhere. Now the reason we use a dye pen is because it keeps you from having to use a fine line brush all the time. And then I can get into the really fine lines and do outlines, and that really brings stuff up. Now I'll go back to Cova color and I'm going to fill in white. Now the Cova color is thicker, so I always do that after I do any staining or anything. So now this project, what I want to do after I do the white is I spray over it with a sheen. And what it does is it starts to make it a nasty yellow, the white. Now I want this effect because this is antique and you don't want it to be too hard white. It takes away from the antique look. So then what you want to do is you want to go back over with the white and just put highlights of white in there at this point, just so you can see a little bit of the hard white, but mostly the antique look. Now you're going to take a mink oil and you're going to just softly go over around it. Make sure it's completely dry before you do this. Dye and the Cova color dries pretty quick. Now what you're going to do is you're going to go through and you're going to punch your holes, make sure that they're centered, and on the back you want to do a little bit bigger. And you're going to end up using a screw for that. Now you're going to end up making the little latch. This is going to go hold your book together, and make sure that you get all sides of that. And here's the part that I hate. The sewing. Oh my gosh, this thing drives me nuts, but it's still quicker than doing it by hand. Now what you're going to do is you're going to put rivets in there. These are large rivets, and you're going to put the latch on it. Now make sure that you tug it around a little bit. And on the other side you're going to use a screw. This gives a little bit of movement to that. Finally you're going to trim your excess from around the book, and you're going to get the book inside, latch, and ready to go. And like I said, to me, I've always loved the spine of a book. It's one of my favorite parts to do. And this will never scratch. This will always be where it is. You can do many things. My Star Wars is my favorite. Bibles, journals, you name it. I've done all kinds of stuff. So for my company, I'd love for you guys to go check it out. It's Celtic Creations US. You can find that on Etsy and Instagram. I want to thank everybody again for joining us for another episode of Fortnite Patriots. I hope you enjoyed this little spin on things. We've been wanting to do this for a while. I'm going to be getting back into the Q drops, and going to be getting into NXIVM and the whole child sex trafficking thing. I'm going to do a whole video on that here soon. So that'll be my next project. I just want to take a break, do something a little bit relaxing, hopefully inspire some people to get creative and to do some things like this just to relax sometimes. It's good to take a break. I want to thank you again for joining us, and I will see you next time.